we know that we don't have any operation that's plausible in Afghanistan without the help of the Pakistanis. But we go to India and urge them to send aid, road builders, engineers, health professionals, military policemen to Afghanistan. So now we're fighting a losing war. We have a civil war in the country that's most important to us, Pakistan. And the Pakistani generals now see that they have not only a massively overwhelming Indian military on their eastern border, but they have an Indian presence on their western border in Pakistan that denies them what they call strategic depth, and what they believe is also an Indian presence that's supporting the Pakistani Taliban and insurgents in the southern province of Baluchistan. So we really have created a situation that is self-defeating from our perspective. And it's not one piece of information did you need from anything classified to be able to know that this was coming.
Well, I know that you're right because that's what Eric Margulies says, and I know that Eric Margulies knows Pakistani generals, like many of them,
he knows
and
a lot
has
about
for years
South
and
Asia.
years.
That's exactly right.
So yeah, where now in your work at CIA, you must have worked with Pakistani intelligence on some occasions, huh? Or a lot?
Oh, constantly, yes.
Okay, so when you're talking about this, you know that from them, not just because you read something somewhere.
Yeah, well,
Both?
yes, that's the truth. The Indians are their mortal enemies, and what happens in the United States is that the federal bureaucracy is so pro-Indian that the Indians get a free ride. You know, they have a caste system in that country that leaves some people still in the status of slavery, but any American politician, really, all he ever talks about is this is the world's biggest democracy. So the Pacs really are up against it. Are they duplicitous? Absolutely. Are they willing to take the money we give them for one thing and use it for another? Absolutely. But what other ally do we have that has tried to help us to the point where they've caused a civil war in their own country?
Yeah, well, I was just chatting with a stranger on the Facebook the other day who turns out was living in Karachi, and said that he's just counting the days to a military coup, that the civilian government is done, the floods, their Katrina times 50, times 100, times 1,000 going on there. That's just the death knell of the civilian government there. And he said that he didn't think that there would be a problem anytime soon with fights within the military and the country breaking up like that. They will still maintain their monopoly on power, but no more elections, no more parliament, at least for a while. And he said this will be within weeks.
Well, I think the military is the one institution in Pakistan that works. We forced President Musharraf out, and in his place now they have Mrs. Bhutto's husband, Zardari, who is the biggest thief probably in Pakistan's history. And while his country was being submerged, he was off visiting Europe. So I don't know any more than the gentleman you were speaking with on the Facebook, Scott. But I think Pakistan, in order to stabilize the country, the military will have to take over. And
that's the position that we have put them in, forcing them really to fight this civil war against their own people. And for what reason? Because supposedly we're after Ayman al-Zawahiri or something.
Well, it's even more than that. Not only were they fighting the civil war, but we forced them to have democracy. Whenever in history shows, again, it's another one of those things where you don't need secret data. The politicians elected in Pakistan always run the country into the ground, and the military has to take over. That's what's happened now, with the help of the floods, in addition. But what we were looking for from the Pakistanis was to do our bleeding for us. We wanted them to get their soldiers killed and their Marines killed, trying to eliminate al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and the Taliban. And so we could sit in our cantonments, and our generals could sit in Tampa and let somebody else do our bleeding. And that very seldom ever works. And now we have to pay the piper now.
So there's a thing in the Post today that Well, no, wait. I can't go to. I want to ask you about Yemen and Somalia in a minute, but on the Pakistan thing, just to kind of go back over and wrap up this thing. Pakistan has India on one side and Afghanistan on the other. In the event, their military strategy is, in the event of a war, particularly an atomic war with India, they would need to be able to retreat across the Khyber Pass into Afghanistan in an attempt to not be completely obliterated off of the face of the earth.
It's more designed at conventional invasion. If you look at Pakistan, Pakistan's a pretty thin country, and the Indians could get across it very quickly. So they value Afghanistan as a place to fall back to.
The escape route, right.
Yeah.
So then we're bringing in the Indians to at least, I mean, it sounds like, and you say in your article, it's mostly civil road construction, this kind of thing, but it's enough to make the Pakistanis at least feel very surrounded by the Indians. And then, as Margulies has explained on this show over and over for years, this is why the Pakistanis, as you say, must be duplicitous and support as they're obeying our orders and fighting the Pakistani Taliban. They're helping finance and support the Afghan Taliban to make sure that the Karzai government, in alliance with India, can never form a real monopoly state there. And we're on this perpetual motion machine of death. Then, of course, as you said, you got Obama and Petaeus and their politics. Their selfish individual interests keeping us there as well. And here's the thing, as you said, these states are sworn enemies, and they got atomic weapons, and they share a border. And, you know, I don't know, man, we're really playing with fire here, Mike. This is not playing around. This is not fooling around. This is the history of the world being written right now.
Yeah. We've put the Pakistanis in a strategic vice, really, with the Indians on both sides of them. And I think that'll be one of the issues that's addressed when the military takes over in Pakistan, that once we get General Kayani in there as the head of the government, he'll speak very frankly to the United States and really tell them that the game is up.
Oh, that's who's next?
I would assume so. He's the chief of the Army staff now. He seems like a very savvy character, and I don't know. I don't know, Scott. That would just be my guess.
Yeah. Well, I don't like, predicting the worst and in the near term or whatever, because if I do, I'm never right anyway. So I try not to do that too much. But I think it's worth bringing up this point that there was a HBO movie that came out in I guess must have been the late 90s when this was relevant in the news. It was sort of a made-for-TV, straight-to-DVD type thing, and it was called The Second American Civil War. And it began with a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, and the American president, who I think was Dan Aykroyd or something, lets all of the Pakistani refugees come to the United States and just says, well, they'll all go to Idaho. And the governor of Idaho has his own political, selfish, ridiculous things going on and says, no way, calls out the National Guard to seal the border. And then all the states start seceding and all the soldiers start killing each other. And it's a giant catastrophe. And it's basically, it has underlying the whole thing, the kind of idiocy that you describe in this policy where these people are so narrow in their vision that this is the kind of blundering catastrophe that they could do. It's a silly worst case scenario in that circumstance. But, I thought it was worth bringing up as Martin Short, as the Karl Rove, George Stephanopoulos type, TV advisor to the president and convinces him to make these terrible decisions in the name of how it'll look, like Rahm Emanuel would.
What has come home to me is that any parent who pays for their children to go to Yale or Harvard to be educated is just throwing his money away, Scott.
Yeah. Making them broke, too.
Yeah.
Really broke. And if you had that much money in the first place, broke is a hard place to land,
That's right.
Well, all right, so now let's talk about the Washington Post this morning. Says, well, the generals and the CIA, or I don't know the CIA, the generals and Obama's team, I guess the White House team differs. Maybe that means John Brennan and those guys. I forget, I don't have it in front of me here, but they disagree with Obama's assessment of the importance of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and here's how they disagree. They're much more focused on al-Qaeda in Yemen. And just like in the West Point speech that Barack Obama gave last November, Somalia, Yemen, you're next, as though America hadn't been killing people in those countries pretty much this whole time. And now, I don't know, do you think we're on the path of a real escalation, perhaps even ground forces into these countries, or are we going to stick with robot assassins, or what?
Well, the problem is, Scott, that the drone and special forces and CIA, those aren't war winners. Those can tread water for you for a while, but ultimately, if you have to fight, you have to use your conventional forces.
Well, do we have to fight in Somalia and Yemen?
I don't think so. Although it's just hard to know for me anymore what they're thinking of. I think a lot of this stuff is made up. Yemen is sexier at the moment than Afghanistan because we're losing in Afghanistan, so Yemen gets pushed to the front pages. The ability of policymakers to kind of dissect and separate the various branches of al-Qaeda as if they weren't related to each other is really astounding. Al-Qaeda in Yemen, Al-Qaeda in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in Iraq are all tied back to Osama bin Laden in the main headquarters. They call them affiliates, but they're really wings. I'm publishing a new book in February, a biography of Osama bin Laden, and it shows how directly Al-Qaeda in Iraq is related in a command and control manner with Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. So all of these problems go back to Al-Qaeda core, the core group that's Osama and those people around him. And if you want to take care of the problem, you've got to go after them. Somalia and Yemen are really sideshows.
Well, and, it's just like when we talked about the Afghanistan war 10 minutes ago and how, not putting in enough forces, leaving morality aside, but just strategery speaking, as George Bush would say, not putting in enough soldiers to just outright win, but putting in enough soldiers to make everything worse for everybody and encourage a brand new resistance and all that. That's what's happening in Somalia, like you said to the Fox News girl the other day. Well, America went in there and intervened in something that had nothing to do with this and turned the place upside down, and now you have people going across the gates of the Red Sea there back and forth between Somalia and Yemen and teaching each other how to make bombs, and even have, American citizens, Somali Americans, as I guess you're supposed to call them with a hyphen there and everything, leaving Minneapolis, the Minneapolis area, and going to Somalia to join the al-Shabaab holy war.
Yeah.
That America started there.
Yeah, it shows you how things can go. In 2005 in Somalia, an Islamic group called the Islamic Courts had taken over finally. The civil war was calming down. The Islamic Courts were spreading control over the country really for the first time in 25 years. And we decided that they were Muslims, they were Islamic, so we couldn't put up with that. So we bombed them. And then we encouraged Ethiopia to invade the country and to knock them out completely. Now, I'm not sure that anybody in the White House was smart enough to know that Ethiopia is a Christian country. And so when the Ethiopians came in, not only did they come in to unseat a Muslim government, but they came in as a Christian power to unseat an Islamic government. And so the whole notion of crusades and defensive jihad comes up again. And, of course, they get beaten. They withdraw in January of 2009, and we still aren't happy to let it settle down. We back a United Nations government that, again, is viewed as an outsider force supported by the Christian West. And so now we have an insurgency that didn't exist before 2005, which controls about two-thirds of the country, is undermining the stability of Kenya and Ethiopia, and a couple weeks ago conducted that attack in the middle of Uganda, which has sent peacekeepers to Somalia. So it's a nightmare, but it's a nightmare of our own making because we don't understand.
Well, and it's the same thing with history beginning all over again every single day because, as Jason Ditz did such a great job of pointing out at Antiwar.com, you literally had Ugandan troops shelling Mogadishu and hitting a soccer field and killing a bunch of kids playing soccer in Mogadishu like 3-4 weeks before that attack in Uganda. Now the insurgency is spreading outside the border, and what do? They attack all the people watching the soccer game, and everybody says, God, these